there's a sense of isolation that I think tends to come up when we're really hard on ourselves and when we feel that lack of self-worth, because there's a like inner narrative of like others can do this, or others are authentic and I'm not, or others are not seeking validation, they're doing it from the purity of their heart and I have this ulterior motive. So I think connecting with other people and realizing like this is a natural part of being an aspiring spiritualist, is that at the beginning and maybe well into middle stages, we have that thing of like we want to be liked and we want to fit in and we want approval and we want to be seen to be doing the thing, and it's not really pure, like I would be doing this anyways, or so I think connecting with that and saying, yeah, and these methods and the holy name and the methods and the teachings are so pure that even if you're doing them with maybe some ulterior motive, right? It's a verse is escaping me that I know is relevant, and you probably know
Akama
it.
sarvakama va moksha kama dharati. Whether you want, whether you want material things, whether you want liberation, whether you're completely free of any desire, still you should connect to Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Live from New York City's Upper West Side, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily spiritual podcast. Today I'm your host, Kaustubha Das. Raghunath, what is Raghunath doing, Mayor? That's so important that he's not here. I don't know. Down in Florida.
He's driving to Daytona, and he's hosting a full all-day workshop.
He's got an all-day workshop in Daytona, so he's in the car driving around.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Normally when he's in the car, it's the only time that you can get his attention, right? He gets lonely.
Then you can't get off the phone with him.
He gets lonely out on the road. So I'm surprised he's not tuned in right now, but maybe he's talking to someone on the phone. Okay. But Raghunath will be back tomorrow with a very fascinating interview. And the guest's name is Hridaya Chaitanya, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And tomorrow's show, we're going to do it at 7 a.m. tomorrow.
Oh, 7 a.m. So to tune in early. And the Hridaya Chaitanya, he walked from France to India. Now, you walk from France to India, you're going to have some adventures.
Yeah.
And he did, apparently. So that'll be an interesting story to hear from him. But we have our special guest. It's been a while, but we're bringing back Dhanya today, who's, we bring her, it's a Q&A day today. And, it was funny. Even last week, we had a question, and I said, you know what, if only Dhanya were here. Well, you know what? We brought Dhanya on, and we're going to do that question again today. This is the first time we've ever done it. We're going to do the question twice. So we want to get a more professional and expert answer. But before we do that, Mara, do you have any other announcements to make?
Yeah, well, we're hosting our second annual spiritual retreat in the sacred city of Mayapur, which is the birthplace of ecstatic kirtan. Right. We're going to powerful holy places like Lord Chaitanya's birthplace, Srivas Thakur's house, and we'll do sunset boat rides on the Ganga.
See, now when we say Srivas Thakur's house, a lot of people don't even know what that means.
Srivas Thakur's house, where the loving ecstasy of kirtan overflowed.
There you go. You sound like you had that written up. That was perfect. Yeah, that was the birth of the Sankirtan movement. It was right there in that house. And it's not really a house anymore. It's a temple. But the energy is there.
Yes.
It's still flowing, right?
Yeah.
Let's bring on Dhanya. Dhanya, welcome back to Wisdom of the Sages. Good to have you here, Dhanya Rico.
I'm happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just talking. Dhanya's was born and raised in the Bhakti tradition. And her father was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, right? Mm-hmm. And not only that, but he's a famous musician. Like in Venezuela, he's like a household name. Like everybody knows him, right?
Yeah.
But just so very, very sweet devotee. Just a very, very obviously very talented, but a very sweet person. And I was just saying he's going to be when I'm in India, he's going to be house sitting for me. He's going to be apartment sitting in my place.
That's so cool. I might have to drop in.
Yeah. Oh, that would be great. Drop in. And unfortunately, I won't be here when he's here.
I know, that's true. I'll drop in again.
Okay. But we bring Dhanya on when we have, questions, especially questions that deal with relationships that deal with psychological questions. Danya, I'll read Danya's bio. Danya holds a master's degree in counselor education and holds a specialist degree in couples and family therapy. Her approach focuses on creative and spiritual wellness. She aims to help individuals and relationships thrive with deep spiritual principles at the core of the therapeutic experience. In addition to traditional modalities, Dhanya is passionate about developing therapeutic tools that incorporate Bhakti principles and practices as means of reconnecting with our essential nature. You know, your clients, do you call it clients? Would that be the term that you use?
Mhm.
Your clients, I assume that it's not only people that practice Bhakti, but you have other clients as well, correct?
Correct, yeah.
But is that approach important to them? Like, are they looking for something special and something spiritual commonly, or?
I find that it does come up that way. I find that, we kind of start with relationships and then that kind of leads to talking about identity. And then when you enter that field of identity, there's going to be that natural contact with like, what is my purpose?
Yeah,
And once you hit that, then it's kind of like a gold mine because then that's when it becomes larger than you, right? And that's when you enter that space of like, well, is there a higher power? What would be my connection to that? What is my relationship to all living beings, not just the people in my inner circle? So it's never anything that is kind of forced or guided in any way, but I do find that like almost inevitably it kind of just happens organically because it's a part of the human experience once you start kind of working on yourself, that the kind of more micro you get, also the more macro you get because you
right.
see everything is kind of connected in that way. So yeah, it ends up going there anyway somehow.
That's nice. That's nice. Okay, are you ready to take on some tough questions?
Yes.
Okay. So
I
we, we
hope.
we took on this question from a gentleman named Prabhat Singh. Uh, it was a very sincere question, and we did our best with it. But as I mentioned earlier, even on the show, I said, "Oh, if only Dunya were here." And so now you are here, and so we're going to ask you and see what you think. He says that being in India is a cutthroat competition of academics amongst the population of students. You know, you're aware of that, right, Dunya?
Oh yeah, for
Like
sure.
India is really competitive
Yeah, yeah.
academically. Due to this, every child is, if not pressurized, at least expected to perform better than others and perform up to expectations of the family. I was never pressurized, but my cousin elders excelled, and it really kicked up the expectations from me and the family. Currently, I'm a doctor aiming for residency exams, but I am just an average student. I have always been a disappointment in matters of grades, except for the one time I passed the medical entrance test. I feel I feel a constant need for validation on the basis of my performance, and it has turned into a behavioral pattern where all of my actions are all either acting for praise or acting for sympathy. To my disappointment, the same thing has creeped into my spiritual life. I could not ask, and this is interesting, I could not ask this question in detail to the mentors I have here because that would go against my behavior of acting as if I have my act together. It gets very bad at times, and I wonder if I have been just a pretender all my life. Even in this email, my thoughts are maybe I'll get some sympathy and validation from this answer. Due to this behavior being deep rooted in me, my chanting, my reading of Shastra, sacred texts, and my sadhana, my daily spiritual practice, they all get enveloped into this acting for praise or acting to get sympathy. I feel this is preventing me from moving forward, both in material as well as spiritual life. How can I root this out from deep within myself to genuinely practice devotion and also study ardently in my academic career? Thoughts, Danya?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much like really deep self-reflection in that to be so self-aware to realize like, wow, this pattern likely started, culturally and in my childhood and there's a that comparison culture. And I'll say that it's, it might be to an extreme in India because it's so competitive, especially in certain fields that are considered desirable, like the medical field and stuff.
Mhm.
But I think it's really a symptom of modern life, this like really cutthroat kind of achievement orientation,
Right.
where who you are is based on what you can do and how well you can do it and how fast you can do it and how much better than everyone else you can do it. And it's I think it's really antagonistic to most people's nature, actually. I find that most people suffer being placed in that kind of culture. So first, I want to normalize that level of like heightened competition and focus on achievement is very detrimental because it kind of pulls us away from a more kind of values-based culture, which is doing something because it's correct, doing something because it's noble, and doing things at nature's pace, which is totally not what modern life is like, right? To study at nature's pace or to work at nature's pace, to heal at nature's pace, right? Even, my husband's a pharmacist and, it's like fast food pharmacy. They just want like, remedies fast, get the things fast, fill the prescriptions fast, how many vaccinations, and it's just like, wow, like I don't think anybody really heals that way. They're just getting like relief fast of like symptoms, but not handling underlying issues. So I do want to kind of validate. It's funny. He says, I feel like maybe I'll get some sympathy and validation from this answer.
Well, here
And
you go.
I really hope you do, because it's totally valid. And I think that that's actually the starting place. I think that if I was speaking to this person one-on-one, I would say, you're wanting validation because validation is necessary in this situation. To say this was super stressful and maybe I didn't feel aligned or inspired or enthusiastic about academics and about maybe even pursuing this line of work, even if I can find some fulfillment in it. It was really hard for me growing up. And I, found that pressure ended up kind of molding parts of my personality. And I'm grieving that because I realize how detrimental that's been in so many ways. Yeah, like let's validate that. That's really hard. There's a lot of pain in that. So, yeah, I think that the validation is totally warranted in this case. Um, I think that many medical professionals or high-level professionals experience a similar feeling. So another thing that I think would be helpful would be to connect with other medical professionals. Maybe not the people in his direct workplace, right? He's saying like, I don't really want
Yep.
to talk to my mentors about it because then it's like I still have that like kind of approval seeking, and totally understandable. But maybe connecting with colleagues, like a trusted colleague, and asking them, how do you do, balancing this appearance achievement based thing and then actually like where you're at, sincerely. And I think that normalizing it and speaking with other people, and I know that many hospitals and doctors groups and stuff have confidential spaces where they can connect so that they can address their own stressors and their own like mental health issues. I'm sure that if we took a look online, we would find something like that too, maybe like an online forum or a chat group or something where people can get support being specifically in that line of work. And I feel like aligning with other professionals in that area would be helpful because you would be able to resonate most accurately with them rather than maybe someone who's a teacher or someone who's a, whatever. So those kinds of things come to mind. But I'm also interested in how, this person is saying that that creeps into the sadhana,
Yeah.
right?
Before we go, I definitely want to go there, but before we go there, I want to ask you one more question before we get there. Let's say his parents or others from whom he's feeling this pressure. It may not be that he could just walk up and say, you know what, I'm not going to take your pressure anymore, just like back off, because who knows how that affects their relationship and what price there is to pay, how that will be received. Is there anything you can share in terms of how to communicate, if or how to communicate what he's feeling, how it's detrimental to him, to be able to communicate that to someone without it, with in a way that they could understand it, in a way that they wouldn't feel defensive?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say how others are going to react because each family system has their own communication mechanisms,
Right.
their own things that they value, right? If achievement is highly valued, then it could be seen as like humiliating to know that someone in the family is not performing, and you don't want to shame the family. Or, if this person's parents are older, then there might even be like a generational divide where they don't even get like, what is the problem? You got the job, you're a doctor now, like you achieved the goal, like just kind of move forward. We don't need to talk about the feelings associated with. So the family culture can sometimes define how open and how honest and explicit you can be with how this experience has been for you. So I think that in exploring that, I would definitely want to know more about what that family's like and what they, how receptive they feel. So
They're
there's not really,
devotees. He mentioned that they're, at least we know that much, that they are devotees.
okay,
So maybe that opens up an area of,
sure.
I think. All right. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt you if you had.
No, yeah, I think that it's a super important factor because, ostensibly then spiritual values are actually the most important, and spiritual values aren't necessarily in any way achievement oriented, right? They're more, especially in the line of
Yeah.
Bhakti, it has a lot more to do with your intention and where your heart is at, and also alignment with your nature, right? There's so much information there about Dharma and about, understanding that, Krishna has given you a certain psychology and a certain biology in this life. And our job is to do the best that we can in alignment with those things rather than forcing or pushing something beyond what's actually natural. So I think, a conversation could definitely be had where, first coming to terms with like, how do I feel about this? Can I get to a place where I can slowly start to kind of appreciate I'm doing the best I can. And I might not be, academically, very, super driven and find so much motivation and fulfillment in being top of my class or being the top 1% of doctors in the nation and whatever. But do I genuinely connect with healing and with listening to people and supporting them and being there for them? So what parts of this career or what parts of my work do actually feel like they're in alignment? And then expressing to my family, like, do you know what I love about my job? That I get to help people. That means a lot to me. And that means more to me than grades do. And that means more to me than accolades or whatever it is. And really just kind of connecting with, yeah, what is the deeper part of your heart that connects with what you do and why you do it? I think that that could be a really great place to start because you're starting with something that is like well in alignment for the person speaking.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's take this to the next place where he took it, was that these same patterns of thinking of the feeling, I guess, a sense of unworthiness and feeling a need for validation and sympathy. He feels that creeping into his his daily spiritual practices. And Dunya, you and I were speaking a little bit before the show that just like we have sage groups, we're very diligently in the background right now. We're getting ready to launch a whole new thing for the Wisdom of the Sages community, which we'll probably call it Sage Care or something like that. But it has to do with reaching out to our listeners, specifically, at least begin with, into our sage groups, and begin to get in touch with them and find out from them and from the sage group leaders, what are the most pressing issues in your spiritual practice, the things that you bump up against that make it challenging, make it difficult, maybe even threaten your enthusiasm or your ability to continue to practice bhakti. And really, hear from them. We've heard back from the sage group leaders, and this idea came up a lot, that people feel unworthy, that the sometimes we set the bar so high, and like when you fall into any other religion or spiritual path, it's not necessarily they're going to ask, like, set these kind of standards of chanting 16 rounds. That's 2 hours of meditation per day. Giving up, meat, serious restrictions in your life according to your diet, sexually, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, whoa, and if I feel like I can't do that, I might really get feelings of like, look at everyone else, like they're spiritual and I'm not, and what is wrong with me? And there was a lot of that. Our answers had a lot of that kind of feedback. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that in particular, how that feeling of unworthiness, as well as the need for sympathy and validation and all that, how that plays into the spiritual practice.
Yeah, I would say that the feelings of lack of worth are really, they're a really prominent issue. And I think that the converse also happens, like you were saying, like, oh, there's all these like rules and restrictions and the things you're supposed to do and, all these injunctions and stuff. And like, if I don't get it done, then I start questioning, like, what is my worth? Maybe I'm not good enough. All these other people are able to do it. And the like inverse of that also happens, which is if you are able to do it, it's not, everyone else is spiritual and I'm not. It's I'm spiritual and everyone
Nobody
else
else
is
in the
not.
world is.
Right, because basically if I'm able to do it, then it means XYZ,
Okay.
which is interestingly also a self-worth issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Okay.
also a self-worth issue because basically we're placing ourselves back in this culture that this devotee is sharing, which is achievement orientation. If I'm able to check all the boxes and do all the things, therefore I'm a good devotee. And if I'm not able to check all the boxes, therefore I'm not a good devotee. It comes from the same paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
which is the doing of things is actually what qualifies me. Right? Rather than
Sure.
seeing like the doing of things is a framework where you're able to eliminate obstacles and then the real thing will be able to come through. Right? But the
Right.
real thing is not the stuff you're doing. The real thing is like what's happening to you? What is the transformation that's going on? And what kind of connection do you feel to, the supreme source and also to other living beings? So it's kind of getting stuck in like, is the method like, and achieving the method, I'm chanting a certain amount of rounds. It's like, yeah, but are you developing feeling? And there's so many, amazing teachers like Satchidananda Swami talks often about it, which is, you could be doing this year after year, lifetime after lifetime, and just not really having that softening of the heart and really developing the qualities that you're looking to develop as a spiritualist. So, in terms of self-worth, I think that there's a requisite humility that I think these methods and techniques are supposed to bring up, which is like, wow, the mind is like so hard to control, right? I have a hard time finishing my rounds because my mind is just like, wow, really powerful. That is a necessary ingredient in spiritual life. You can't skip that step.
Okay.
So you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and
Yeah.
kind of say like, well, then, chanting rounds is just like, if you do it or you don't, it's more about where your heart is at. It's like, you need this kind of medicine,
Yeah.
right? You need this medicine. And for some people, they'll only really confront the kind of cold, hard truth of what it's like to interact with the mind when they sit down and they try and meditate for an hour or two. And
Sure.
that becomes, medicinal, or to restrict, your kind of more base primal impulses, sexuality, or a desire for, a habit forming things like addictions and intoxication and stuff. It's like only when you confront, kind of like, what can you do without? Do you realize like what else is there? What substance
Mm.
am I made of? So I think that those things can actually strengthen your worth because you're saying, oh, I'm not my sex life, even though I found so much value and so much identity formed there. Maybe I felt worthy in my life because of who I am or how I interact sexually. Let me put a pause on that. And now what's left? Well, maybe intoxication is a huge part of the culture and it's a big way of coping. And maybe it's a way that I've been able to not have to deal with trauma or difficulties in my upbringing and stuff. Well, what if I put a pause on that? Well, now what do I have to do? So each time that you put a pause on something, it's supposed to reveal something to you, some working material that you're supposed to use your spiritual life to try and process and digest. And I think that maybe culturally, also because our movement is quite new, we haven't really developed a culture where your spiritual life is meant to catch you and nourish you, and community is meant to nourish you as you start modifying these habits and these lifestyle things to kind of help you see like, oh, now all this stuff is coming up that I really need to take a look at. And that's where like the good work actually happens.
How does that work? I mean, I suppose in your field, that work takes place through some kind of therapeutic conversation or discussion, right? Are there also kind of homework that you give people that would be struggling with something like this?
Yeah, I would definitely suggest, again, connecting to others. I think that validation, there's a sense of isolation that I think tends to come up when we're really hard on ourselves and when we feel that lack of self-worth, because there's a like inner narrative of like others can do this or others are authentic and I'm not, or others are not seeking validation. They're doing it from the purity of their heart and I have this ulterior motive. So I think connecting with other people and realizing like this is a natural part of being an aspiring spiritualist is that at the beginning and maybe well into middle stages, we have that thing of like we want to be liked and we want to fit in and we want approval and we want to be seen to be doing the thing. And it's not really pure, like I would be doing this anyways, or, so I think connecting with that and saying, yeah, and these methods and the holy name and the methods and the teachings are so pure that even if you're doing them with maybe some ulterior motive, right? It's a
Yeah.
verse is escaping me that I know is relevant, and you probably
Akama
know
sarvakamo va moksha kamo
it.
dharati. Whether you want, whether you want material things, whether you want liberation, whether you're completely free of any desire, still you should connect to Krishna.
Yeah. And you should, not just because it's the right thing, but because it'll work. It's
Yeah.
because, there's no loss or diminution. Whatever you do is to your credit, to your spiritual credit, not to your material, external accomplishment credit. It's not like someone's going to give you a certificate, but internally, it's to your credit in the sense that you're slowly, slowly cleansing the dust from the mirror of the heart. And that's a real thing. So it's also having faith. I think that there's a faith piece here and a humility piece here, which is like, Krishna, maybe I am approaching you for like all the wrong reasons, and I'm not even really sure, but I have faith that if there's something that needs to be purified, that I'm, whatever like mustard seed of sincerity I can, glean from this, like, let me at least just offer that. Maybe all the rest is, where they say like anytime that there's a sacrifice, there's going to be smoke, and
Yeah.
maybe the whole thing is smoky. Okay, but like there's just like a little tiny flame. Something there is generating heat. Like, okay, then let me just offer that and then see what happens with that. And I think that that's healthy humility, and there's real sincerity there at the core.
Boy, I think we could just discuss this question the whole time. And I want to move on to some other questions, but
Mhm.
there's still a couple of things. This one, I'm almost just kind of cheating here, but this is the kind of thing we want to do with Sage Care. Like if I were to ask you, let's say we surveyed, 300 Sage Group members, and it came back that a lot of people were struggling with this. How would you, just off the top of your head, so, but what do you think would be an effective way to address that on that scale? Let's say we had like 70 people said, this is real. I really do struggle with this, Would we create a group? Would we create some kind of forums? What would you, just off the top of your head, what do you
Yeah,
think
I,
would
I
be a way to
definitely
address
think
it?
creating groups. I mean, even, what comes to mind is like when, you guys are so interconnected with the Bhakti recovery groups. And I know that
Yeah,
one branch of the 12-step community is Codependence Anonymous. And
right.
a lot of codependent behavior, literature, information addresses this dynamic of like, why do I do the things that I do? And why do I seek other people's approval? And why is my identity or self-worth based on somebody else kind of dictating what is right and what is wrong? And I believe that some of their literature, I was actually checking it out yesterday, as a matter of fact, it was saying something like, I'm doing this for someone else's approval, or I'm doing it because it actually harmonizes with my belief system and my values. So kind of tapping into other communities that are already working on similar issues, I think would
Yeah,
be really helpful. And so, yeah, forming a group where it's like, yeah, I'm struggling with authentic sadhana. Authentic sadhana meaning something that feels steady, something that feels sincere, and something that I feel like is done for its own sake because it's worthy and it's good and it's kind of going to allow me to come back to myself. I think that would be an amazing group. I'd want to join
yeah.
that.
All
So,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
or maybe we have one of those things on Zoom where like you bring in a lot of people and then someone like yourself or someone else could begin to talk about
Yeah.
this kind of malady, would you call it? I
Yeah.
guess something
Yeah.
like, and share, professional ideas on it, put it into a context of bhakti, then break into groups, and in those groups have certain conversations come back. That kind of thing might be therapeutic.
Yeah, yeah, and I think having other people hold you in that truth and see you, to be able to share this vulnerably
Right.
and to have other people say, "Yeah, I see that and I
So a
get that."
small group that you come back to,
Yeah,
like that. All right.
yeah,
One last thing I want to throw your way in this on this subject. Our songs, our literatures, often they have expressions that we've enshrined, in a sense, as being very deep and important and special thoughts and feelings that are commonly they're expressions that I think to a mental health professional they might sound unhealthy, right? Like expressions of extreme humility. Um,
Is there a specific example?
Well, I'm lower than this and that, and
Okay, I thought, yeah.
um, from your perspective as both a devotee and as a I suppose we could say like a mental health expert or therapist. What is a healthy way for us to understand those and process those kind of statements?
Yeah, I think, I've struggled with this as well because it seems like an unattainable expression of humility, to be honest. It
Mhm.
feels like just like a million miles away. And it also sounds like something like, yeah, if I said it to my neighbor, they'd be like, are you okay? Like, you need. So I think that that kind of language, these are these people's very personal meditations. So I will say that when someone is expressing this deep level of humility, just like when they're expressing a profound sense of separation or a profound sense of union, right? We're reading like some of these, teachers and saints and sages, their most intimate expressions of devotional realization. So just like if I was going to open someone's journal and I was going to, see,
Hmm.
some very private expression of something that's going on deep in their internal world, I think that it would feel unnatural and artificial for me to read it and go, no, I'm going to try and feel this way. It's like, wait a minute, you just read someone's journal. That is their private, that's like so private and so special. And in an attempt to understand their mood, in an attempt to understand where I could be, right? Naturally, organically, it's nice to have contact. They're being so generous in sharing those. It's like someone is generously offering you to read an entry into their diary. And it's a way of them sharing who they are with you, but I don't think with the intention that you should imitate that,
Right.
right? So
Hmm.
I think that kind of maybe what's helpful for me, I'll say that, what's helpful for me is to place it more in a personal context of this is someone who I admire. Like one of my heroes is sharing their personal realization. And it's like languaged and formulated in a way that feels like amazing and also kind of like overwhelming and like almost unattainable to me. But I understand that that's a flavor. That is a realization that happens when you take this process like to its fullest degree, when it really goes deep. You start like simultaneously having the process of understanding your worth in the most profound way possible and expressing humility
Right.
in this way that feels like absolutely like impossible to comprehend. So I don't think it's a contradiction of self-worth. I think it's understanding your worth so deeply that this phrase or this comment or this language doesn't in any way conflict. It only kind of helps kind of,
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense, but it kind of
No, that was
bolsters you.
that was very helpful. I think in a lot of spiritual traditions have show some kind of examples of the deepest spiritual consciousness appearing as madness.
Mhm.
And until we were all kind of like moving around in a vehicle of a human body and a human mind with a false ego, and we operate through that ego. And if someone speaks on a level that is entirely removed from that ego, it may feel like, oh, you have no standing, you have no support, you're like kind of like inc- just incredibly vulnerable. But there may be certain spiritual ecstasies that we don't understand because we're still holding on to this false ego.
Mm.
That's someone that has no false ego is expressing, and they're fine, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even though it sounds to us like, oh my God, they're like desperately, vulnerable right now. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but no, your answer is very helpful to me. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This is coming from our dear friend Miguel, otherwise known as Brother Nature. And he writes, Dear Mara, Raghunath, and Kastuba, Hare Krishna, I've been doing some pondering, and I do not think I was shown or taught how to properly apologize or forgive for that matter. Like this is something we just don't learn in life, right? We're not taught this maybe. At times, saying sorry feels empty and insufficient, so much so that regret stays in my heart for days, months, years after. Similarly, even after forgiving someone, feelings of resentment keep on coming back. Things get even more complicated when I turn that resentment inward and become incapable of forgiving myself for my own wrongdoings. I humbly ask you to help me understand, how does one learn how to engage in these two activities in a productive way? Apologizing and forgiving. Right? What is the proper mood, intentions, expectations of both parties? What does true forgiveness to others and oneself supposed to feel like? That's an interesting question. I would not be where I am today if it weren't for your daily efforts to disseminate wisdom and love to the community. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Miguel. So there's quite a few questions in there. Do you want to take them one at a time? Do you want to just start to speak in general?
I think one at a time might be good because, yeah, there is a lot there. I think it's a very rich
Okay.
question.
So let's see. Let me look at them again. Pick them out one at a time. Help me understand, how does one learn to engage in these two activities in a productive way?
Yeah, in working with people, I think that it's such a beautiful realization to see like, wow, we're not really taught how to apologize. And then the flip side of that is we're not really taught how to forgive. And I think that um, in the ways in which we might see it kind of played out. It might seem superficial, right? It might seem kind of like just part of the social contract, like, oh,
What
you
we do
messed
to keep
up.
moving along without
Exactly.
killing each other or
Exactly.
quitting our job or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think that it's kind of in a way of kind of protecting our basis. So it's like self-centered apologizing or self-centered forgiveness. And I think that it's a limited way of doing it. I think that it's kind of more basic and it doesn't reach all these levels that Miguel is alluding to. And I think that it's unsatisfying after a while because you realize, yeah, like there has to be more to this. And there's a felt sense of when a cycle is complete. When I've apologized
okay.
properly, I imagine
Hold,
there's a felt sense.
yeah, he asked, what does true forgiveness to others and oneself, what is it supposed to feel like?
Right.
So
Yeah.
could you continue that thought? That you were really,
Yeah. So I think that people have a sense that you're supposed to feel a certain way once you've completed something. Now, what I will say is that in my personal experience, in my professional experience, there are tools and resources for how to do these things, and what it's going to feel like is going to be different from person to person. So what is it supposed to feel like when you forgive? Well, you might hear people say, well, you feel like a burden has been lifted, or you feel relief, or you feel compassion for yourself and for the other person, you feel a sense of understanding. And I think,
closure, they
yeah,
say.
closure, moving on, mending, or just like kind of like tying up loose ends and like the moving on from a certain relationship. I think that those all can be true, but I would be careful to look for, well, until I feel this thing, then I'm not really forgiving. So the first part kind of, there's a really, really great book, and I had it here pulled up. There's an author named Harriet Lerner. She has a cool book called The Dance of Anger, but she also has another book called Why Won't You Apologize?
Okay.
And I think that she's got something, and I've used this for teaching before, where she says that there's 9 essential ingredients of a really good apology. And the thing is, I think if we really understand a good apology, it helps us understand forgiveness as well, because we realize the components that are necessary for that process of healing to take place, regardless of what kind of side you're on. So I'll just go through them really quickly.
This may speak to the expectations of both parties. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also you have to be rooted in certain values and in certain realizations in order to formulate a really good apology, because
Okay.
it's taking more than just kind of saying the cursory words of like, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. That was my bad. So rather than just kind of moving it kind of through this performative thing, so she says an apology, for example, it doesn't include the word but. So basically saying, I'm sorry that I was late, but I was in a rut. It's just leave it at the first part. Just say,
Mhm.
I apologize for being late,
Right.
and let that sit there without that need to kind of excuse or frame. So that's one basic thing. She says, keep the focus on your actions and not on the other person's response. So I'm sorry that I was late. Now, obviously, he's asking about other kinds of forgiveness, but this is just a simple example. I'm
Sure.
sorry that I was late. I know that you're mad. You get mad when people are late. You like for people to be on time, and I should have kept this. Like, don't focus on the other person. You say, I agreed to be here at 9 a.m. and I wasn't able to make it at that time, and I apologize because that was our agreement and I wasn't able to honor that. Okay, so just
Okay.
focus on your actions, right? Include an offer of reparation or restitution that fits the situation. And this may not fit all situations, which I think is important, which is, I'm sorry, next time, I'll come a few minutes earlier and I'll set up the room or whatever it is. Or, I'll send you a text next time if I'm running late so I don't feel like, you're wasting your time. I want to honor you. So basically, it's like, how are you going to change? How are you going to do things a little bit differently if it applies to the situation?
Okay.
The other thing that she suggests, which I think is interesting, is not to overdo it. And I think we've all experienced an apology that has now entered the realm of over apologizing, and it's now again focused on the apologizer. Right?
Yeah.
So I feel so bad for what happened that I'm going to keep talking about it because what I'm seeking is self-soothing and not actually acknowledging of something that I need to ask for
Right.
forgiveness for. It makes me feel good to apologize because it makes me feel better about what happened. But that's me focused, whereas I should be focused on the relationship healing, the impact of what I did. Doesn't require, requires that you do your best to avoid a repeat performance. So basically, it's apologizing with the commitment to do it differently next time. It's not an apology with like an open door policy of like, well, it could happen again and I'll be sorry then also. So, it's
So that's one of the expectations on the party that's seeking forgiveness.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another one that I think is important, and this also has to do with kind of the more severe things that we have to apologize for, is she says that an apology is not meant to serve silencing the other person, which is your pain is painful for me to witness. So I'm apologizing so we can just move on from this.
Mhm.
Right? It's very
Yes.
difficult. So I think that is
Nothing
really important
changes,
in
but
apologizing.
yeah. I felt that before sometimes where you feel like someone is they're going through a step and almost like it almost is making them it's kind of convenient for them to kind of end something that really you're meant to be digging into.
Yes.
You're right. Yeah.
Right. And so that's actually something that she says in her work, is that she says that an apology is also an invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've acknowledged that I've done something, I've made a mistake, there was something that I did that hurt you. And now how you react, like creating space for that, or maybe there's a topic that we need to dig into, or if there's an issue that we are now shedding light on because of what just happened. So, with that, she also says that when you apologize, you don't do it with the condition that the other party has to now do something, right? I'm apologizing. So now you owe me this and that, or now you have to
Mm-hmm.
talk about this, or you have to stop talking about this, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand with that silencing thing or with the ending of the thing, which is you apologize and you don't put conditions on the other person of how they're going to react, what they're going to do with this apology. Does the issue continue or not? You just acknowledge. Again, it's like a very humble, self-reflective place of like, make the apology real. You're acknowledging your contribution to a problem, and the other person is autonomous, right? The other,
That's right.
honor that person's autonomy. And likely what we've done to hurt another person has been a violation of their autonomy. So don't perpetuate that violation. Honor that autonomy and allow them to.
Gotcha.
So the other thing is, and I know that this is true also in 12-step work, which is you offer the apology so long as that apology is not going to further hurt that person.
Okay.
So it's being conscious of, am I going to do harm by approaching this person, touching this topic, opening up something that maybe they're not ready to, and that might take some sensitivity, and it also might take kind of reflecting on your intentions to apologize with someone else who might be familiar with the situation, and they might say something like, listen, this person's not really ready to talk about this just yet. Let's figure out maybe like a mediated time. Asking someone's permission to have this conversation is also kind of giving them consent to talk about something that might be like really heavy or really sensitive for them. So
All right. Very good. That's very helpful. I was thinking when it says like, what should forgiveness feel like? My thought was you stop thinking about it, right? It's just like kind of like, maybe it's playing loops in your mind and then you forgive someone and now your mind's free. Like it has I think it was, oh yeah, it was Yudhishthir when he was asked these questions by the Yaksha.
Mm.
And I think within that, he speaks about forgiveness at length. Oh, we should pull that back up. And but one of the highlights of that for me was he said, forgiveness is a quiet mind, I think is what he said.
Mm,
Right? In other words, when you're forgiven, then it's no longer playing in your mind anymore. Then you've really forgiven, not just said, I forgive you. If you say, I forgive you, but it's still playing in your mind all the time, your feelings of resentment are there, you haven't actually forgiven.
yeah. Yeah. Forgiveness is a quiet mind. I think I also remember hearing that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really great book that actually Jai Jagannath and I did a book study of this maybe like 2 years ago or something. It's called Radical Forgiveness. It is not a book for the faint of heart.
Okay.
It is quite radical. Like even having read it several times now and doing the work with him, I was just thinking like, wow, there's some shocking ideas in here. But there's a whole process and there's like a really deep kind of philosophy and understanding of psychology that underlies this book. And I think there's a lot of good information there. And one of the things that the author says is that forgiveness is not something you can actually generate. Forgiveness is such a powerful spiritual experience that you actually receive forgiveness from God and you are able to kind of channel it and offer it. It's not
When you
something you can
forgive.
kind of, yeah, what you forgive. So if you have something to forgive, someone has
Yeah.
wronged you and you want to forgive, or you're even considering that forgiveness could be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, that it's something that is kind of given to you from a divine source. It's not something you can self-generate because it's such a massive experience. And so one of the things that the author encourages us to do is to say, I actually don't feel like forgiving. I don't feel that forgiveness, but I'm willing. I'm willing to receive forgiveness in this situation. I'm willing to receive it, meaning I'm actually
Oh,
willing to
got you.
receive it from God
In other words,
in order to offer it to the wrongdoer.
we might be willing to say, I forgive you,
Exactly.
but we still don't feel it.
Right.
And I just can't find it in me. So it's actually something that descends on you when you're open to
Exactly.
it. Very
Exactly.
interesting.
And so he's saying that we don't ever really forgive. We're only ever willing to forgive. Right?
Ah,
And then
okay.
forgiveness happens in its own time. And again, kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning with the other question is, what is the pace of nature?
Right.
Right? Are we trying to accelerate a process that has its own organic timing according to karma, according to our psychology, according to the other person's psychology, where amends tried to be made? It's like rushing to feel forgiveness because I feel so uncomfortable facing the hurt of a situation. But that's not what forgiveness is meant to do. Forgiveness is not a hurt eraser. In fact, in this book and in so many teachers of forgiveness, and they teach that you have to be able to safely but completely face the injury in order to properly forgive. And sometimes forgiveness is our little
Right.
escape hatch to not deal with what happened and to not have to face, how much this hurt me and how heavy this was for me and all the impact that it had. So I think, even societally, community wise, we want to rush to forgive because looking back at what happened to us as a group, as a people, as a nation, as a whatever, is so painful that we just want to get on with the reparations. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
but you can't do it thoroughly if you're not able to kind of face the pain first.
speaks so much to what Miguel was asking. He said at times saying sorry feels empty and insufficient, so much so that regret stays in my heart for days, months, even years after. Similarly, forgiving someone, feelings of resentment keep coming back. So
Mm.
you're saying you have to open yourself up to be willing to it, and then also it takes time to receive that and to fully, you have to be a little patient with it too.
Yeah, and knowing that there's one certain pains that you're gonna have to forgive many times
Mm.
to visit and revisit
Different layers of,
forgiveness.
yeah,
Yeah, and understanding that each time that you maybe are able to access even one small layer of forgiveness and go, oh, that I read a quote recently and it was saying forgiveness feels like understanding. Right? Understanding doesn't mean validating. Understanding doesn't mean letting someone off the hook. Understanding doesn't mean now you bear the emotional burden of solving the situation. It just means understanding your role, understanding the other person's role, understanding the context, understanding karma. So a lot of it has to do with also your personal philosophy. Why do things happen? Right? And I think that's where our Bhakti literature is so rich. Like, even the Tatenu Kampam verse, it's saying that there's an element to patiently waiting out a
yes,
process,
yeah,
right? To be fully complete,
right.
right? And he's in the verse, actually, it says, Rid vag vapubir. So it means my heart, my form, the things that I say, all of me is involved in faith such that I can wait out and fully digest the results of all these actions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to rush a process,
Right.
patiently waiting out. And then what do you get, right? You are the rightful recipient of spiritual realization, of union with God. Why? Because you're doing things at the pace of God's timeline, of nature's timeline. You're allowing things to unfold organically. So
And
yeah,
then it
knowing,
also says, I believe it also says there, body, words, and mind,
yes.
right? Like there's layers, you
Exactly.
know?
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of times we'll find like, okay, we hit one layer, something else unfolded, and now I have even more to look at. It's like, yeah, and that is probably a very natural part of the process. So understanding, it's kind of like I give the example of sometimes like a spiral. Like you might circle around the same thing, go, what? I'm dealing with this again. It's like, yeah, but there's some transformation there. You're getting somewhere. There's some
You're going
elevation
around it,
with
but
it.
you're also progressing as you're going through.
Exactly. So I think there are things that, I think that um, debunking this myth that forgiveness is a one-stop shop where I just do the thing. Again, that same achievement orientation. I did it. I forgave. It
Right.
should be done now, right? And it's like, no, maybe there's going to be a process of forgiveness where there's many times you revisit it.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Dunya. We're running out of time, but we have one more question. Could we go a little overtime if
Yeah,
need
sure.
be? Okay. This question is an anonymous question. Raghunath believes that the anonymous ones are the juiciest of the questions. So, so the question is, finding wisdom of the sages and establishing my bhakti practice has changed my life for the better in so many ways. I'm grateful to you for all your guidance and support. Thank you so much, anonymous writer. I have a challenging relationship with my mother over the last decade at least. And the practice the practice of bhakti has made me much more tolerant, compassionate, and loving toward her, even when she does not reciprocate. After some extended time with her, I have realized that she is just not a kind person anymore. I understand why I have a lot of empathy for her. I've done a lot of work to heal much of my codependent tendencies, and although her health, both mental and physical, is very poor, I also know that she has to take ownership and have the desire to change. However, I can't help but feel like I'm being neglectful by not inserting myself more because her health is so poor. I feel like I'm being a bad daughter and bhakta. Is this just my codependent nature creeping in? Is it okay for me to just keep a distance since her energy is so tamasic? She shows no desire to help herself, and she's generally unkind when I'm around. Thank you in advance for your guidance. Tough one.
Mm.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, it sounds like this person has done some work in taking a look at, maybe some codependent patterns, right? Where the one simple way of putting it is that my understanding of myself, my approval of myself, my self-love is contingent on another person. It's not
Yeah.
independent of another person. And it creates harm. And I think that, this is this person's mother. So, it's probably something that's gone on, since they can remember. And those are the most difficult patterns to modify because they were rooted at a time where our psyche was being formed. So I want to preface by saying that when you work with family of origin or people that brought you up or people that you knew when you were very, very young,
Right.
that's like like in a Nintendo
It's
game,
a
that's
whole
like the
nother field
boss
in the
level.
workplace or yeah.
It's the boss level. It's like the hardest arena to modify, and it's because of that. So when we feel like, wow, this is like such a calcified pattern, like it's so hard to break out of this, it's like, yeah, because you're trying it out in the hardest mode. You're trying it
Okay.
out in the most difficult situation. So sometimes we'll make progress and create a little autonomy and create some space and have good boundaries and find that we kind of slip back, and just to know that that's really normal and that is how that happens. And I feel like, it's good to talk about it in that context as well. So I was looking over this, Codependence Anonymous literature, and some of what they talk about is so related. They have this one great worksheet called Codependency and Recovery, the Differences. And they create these little contrast statements so that we understand, like, where am I in this boundary?
Can I just slow you down? Could you just really define for us codependency?
Yeah. So codependency is a pattern of behavior where a person or both people start to enact self-betrayal in an attempt to create closeness or intimacy with the other person.
Self-betrayal means we harm ourselves in some way.
We're harming ourselves. We're going against our own values. We're not able to honor our own natures or our own needs, thinking that this will increase closeness, safety, intimacy with the other person.
Okay.
Right? So it's a relationship where both people's needs are not honored, where both people's autonomy and well-being is not equally valued.
Gotcha.
Right? And a lot of times this is created as a coping mechanism to what is seen as like, I need to support some of my needs. So this, again, it happens really early on, kind of like in childhood, where I maybe sense that a parent is not really available. And so I have to kind of overperform it in order to compensate for their lack of availability. Or, there's a parent that's a substance abuser. And so I overfunction because they underfunction. So a lot of times it's like the proportions were not right in a very early prime relationship. And then I learned that as a way of doing relationship with people lifelong.
Gotcha.
So on this worksheet, they give examples that I think resonate with this case. In codependency, I use giving as a way of feeling safe in a relationship. In recovery, I can still give because pleasing you pleases me, but I want to receive as well. And that two-way connection doesn't have to do with safety. So that's one, right? Or she's saying, in codependency, my self-esteem is bolstered by solving your problems and relieving your pain. In recovery, my self-esteem comes from solving my problems and sometimes experiencing my pain. So it's basically saying, there is some sense by this person who's asking this question that they can feel when they're going a little too far into mom's world and supporting mom's needs and showing up for them to the point where it becomes detrimental for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where really valuable information lies. They say like boundaries are, I might get the quote wrong, but it's saying something like boundaries are how close I can get to you while still loving myself.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's basically saying, yeah, maybe I do want to serve and be present, and there's some love and there's some affection and some bond there. But I don't want to step so far into that I start harming myself, betraying myself. I become inauthentic. And now I'm actually entering the realm of ulterior motives.
So when she asks, does this mean I'm being a bad daughter or Bhakta, you're saying that's not necessarily true at all.
Right.
You very well may be setting the right boundary.
Yeah, and I'll say that when you have, problematic patterns like this, because it's unfamiliar, it will feel wrong.
Okay.
Right? When you've done things a certain way for a certain amount of time, I give this example sometimes of like if you've been doing yoga for a long time and you've been doing one pose in a way that's like actually not in alignment, but you do it over and over and over and over again. When you finally get into proper alignment, it might feel really uncomfortable. It's like, yeah, but it's just because it's unfamiliar. This is actually the proper alignment. It's just by habit you've been doing it the other way. So that happens to us in relationships too, which is it's been done this way and it's kind of calcified. And then to break free of that pattern feels unfamiliar. There's like huge guilt that can come from that, right? We have a pretty predictable sequence of events, which is you create a boundary that actually aligns with your nature, and then two things happen. You meet resistance because there's nothing that energy
This
likes
is a
more
new
than a
thing.
boundary,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is a boundary. And you meet resistance because it's new, because you're changing the dynamic and nobody likes their system to get shaped up. When you change your role in a family system or in a relationship system, you are sort of inadvertently forcing the other person to also
Right.
modify. No one really likes that. So first you meet resistance. And the other thing that's a pretty predictable sequence is a wave of guilt,
Okay.
right? So understanding that the feeling of guilt isn't the indicator. It's not what you should take as an indication of, am I on the right track or not? Because you might be feeling that guilt just because it's something so unfamiliar. Maybe there's manipulation at play. Maybe the feedback that you're getting, the nature of the resistance kind of presses on that guilt. So I would say don't use your guilt as the metric of whether this is the right thing to do or not. It's got to go deeper than that. It's got to go beyond the emotions into like the values and actually tapping into what you really believe in.
So she asked, is this just my codependent nature creeping in? And you're saying it's the natural thing that you're going to feel at that time because you've made this change, and until it's fully matured or something like that, you're going to have some remnants of feelings like that.
Yeah. And if you have, this kind of situation, especially if you feel like you're in a spiritual process that's giving you illumination and insight and personal work to do, and maybe the other person is on another journey, they're not in that space right now, it's very unlikely that we create change and we're starting to create boundaries and the other person's like, oh my God, thank you so much. This is going to be great for our relationship. I'm so excited. They're never going to be like that,
Doesn't
right?
sound like mom's on that path right now.
I don't think anybody would be. I don't think anybody would be, because you're shaking up, it rocks people to the core of even who they conceive of themselves to be. So it's basically saying, and again, this is where you kind of come back to that faith piece, which is I truly believe I'm doing the best that I can. I'm doing it for the right reasons. And also I'm onboarding prayer. So I think that the like magic element that we can add to this that I think would really upgrade this process, in addition to creating healthy boundaries and all that, is to know that you can do so much for the people that you love without their involvement.
Right.
And part of that is prayer, to really sincerely, like genuinely pray for somebody, to pray for their well-being, to pray for their soul, to pray for their connection to divinity, to pray for your relationship. Like that doesn't fall on deaf ears. Literally, Krishna is available. They say that as soon as you utter a prayer, the prayer is already answered. Now, what that answer looks like, right? That's not under our control, but every prayer is heard and every prayer is answered. And I have full faith in that. So in those spaces where we're like, I don't know what to do in this relationship. I don't know what more I can do for this person, or I don't know how we can really relate. Pray, and I really think that that's a powerful way of expressing love, and the other person doesn't even need to ever know about it.
It's interesting you mentioned that just as we wrap up here, because Achuta on the chat board, going back to the question about forgiveness, was asking, can we forgive without involving them in the process of forgiveness? So yeah, there's this, we can't change necessarily how other people can act, but we can go through these processes ourselves. Even if I was having a nice conversation with one of our regular daily listeners, Maya, and we're talking about how we feel like the opposite of validation in a sense. Sometimes we feel judged or so on, and then we're talking about that in kind of in the context of the great saints. We see that all the great saints in all the different spiritual traditions, usually when you hear their life story, it talks about them being misunderstood, falsely accused, slandered in different ways, and then how they respond. And they always respond with this tolerance, without becoming upset, without lashing back. That's something kind of fundamental to the nature of the deeply spiritually realized person. And it's almost like they must go through that. And maybe in order to hone it, also in order to exemplify it. But it's in that where you were just going in that prayer, maybe no one else is validating me. Maybe nobody else is recognizing my tolerance, but God's in my heart. And that's all the validation that I need. Like that becomes deeper and deeper when we turn within. And then that relationship isn't just something that we like, I have faith that this relationship exists, but we're actually living that relationship and being transformed by it, really feeling it.
Totally.
Yeah. Dhanya, you've been a tremendous help. Yeah, you can hit the music, Mara. Thank you, Mara. You've been a tremendous help. These were places that Raghunath and I are not quite equipped to handle. You bring such a level of experience and realization into it. Let me ask you a question. Are you writing a book? Are you working on a book?
No, I'm not. I feel like
that script for
Vani,
for Vani, I was thinking that to turn it into a book.
I remember you saying that. You were like, when you write that script, that's gonna be half your book already done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's somewhere maybe in the ether. Maybe in time it'll come, but I don't
To let the
feel
kids grow up
qualified
just a
to
little,
refer to
get the
it.
kids in school, and maybe you'll have.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe then.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
and being on the show.
Thank you.
This is
Always,
lots of
always
us.
such an honor. Thank you.
We always get tremendously good feedback whenever you come here. So
Thank you. I love
bring lots
you.
bring lots to the show. Thank you. Mara, thank you for being here as always.
Thanks, Prabhu. Another great show.
Another great show. And you're always solid as a rock here. Folks. All right, everybody. That's it for today. Raghunath will be back. Please note, at an unusual time for Sunday. He'll be here at 7 a.m. tomorrow with that fascinating interview. And otherwise, then Monday. Oh, Monday's a day.
We're off on Monday.
I
Yeah.
got 2 days off.
Wow, it's like a weekend.
Like a normal person with a weekend.
Yeah.
All right, great. So then maybe I'll pop in tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
I'll see you all on Monday. Thank you all so much. It's a beautiful day for a beautiful day. Let the magic flow.